You go down smooth. Could you go down smooth? Could you go down smooth? Could you go down smooth?
More than half of U.S. states have legalized or decriminalized cannabis for medicinal or recreational purposes. And while the plant is still illegal federally, its useful but less entertaining relative hemp has finally been legalized via the recent Farm Bill. Unfortunately, medical and recreational cannabis is still classified alongside heroin and LSD as a Schedule I narcotic.
It is ludicrous, absurd, crazy to have marijuana in the same level as heroin. Ask the late Philip Seymour Hoffman if you could. Nobody dies from marijuana. People die from heroin. And every second that we spend in this country trying to enforce marijuana laws is a second that we're not enforcing heroin laws. And when we put marijuana on the same level as heroin and LSD and meth and crack and cocaine, we are telling young people not to listen to the adults about the ravages and the problems, and they don't listen because they know you're wrong. With all due respect, you should be listening to scientists. I understand the parents who are grieved because their child died of an overdose. They didn't overdose on marijuana. And you're listening to them rather than the scientists? Mr. Botticelli, it may go back to A Few Good Men, the movie, Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. The truth is the drug war failed. Your direction on marijuana is a failure.
It's hard to identify what is the single biggest madness in that war, but this is one of them, the idea that marijuana is the equivalent of heroin.
It's Schedule I, as heroin is. Opium and cocaine is Schedule II. And it's based on a system for determining drugs in the schedule on potential for abuse and medical uses as a medicine. Well, I think people have seen in 20 states that it's good for medicine. It deals with nausea, and it can help. And also the abuse, it's not like these other drugs. You don't get addicted to marijuana, the addiction that makes you knock off a 7-Eleven and kill somebody because you've got to get a fix. I mean, you know, it may drive you to a Ben & Jerry's or a donut shop, but that's not going to hurt the guy at Ben & Jerry's, the donut shop. They're going to like it. It's good for profits.
This categorization by the federal government results in legitimate cannabis businesses being subject to high tax rates of about 50 to 80% or more, depending on the state, because the dispensaries can't deduct typical business expenses like advertising costs, employees' salaries, rent, and health insurance from their federal and state taxes. Many cannabis dispensaries are also still forced to deal entirely in cash.
There are some serious challenges in the conflicts between state and federal law that will eventually need to be resolved.
And, you know, Tony, for example, one of the issues which was interesting was a lot of banks won't service some of the pot businesses because it would violate federal law. And so there's a lot done in cash transactions because they can't have a bank account.
It's not only banking. In fact, the awkward interval we're in where states are saying yes and the government at the federal level is saying no creates problems in banking, tax problems. You pay a lot more in taxes if you're a marijuana shop. Some security firms, traditional firms, won't do business with you. Armored car companies won't do business with you. It's hard for you to find insurance that you can afford. You pay higher rent. All of that is a huge problem for these experiments because it contributes to higher overhead costs, and those costs end up in the pot. And if the price is too high, the black market continues to flourish.
In the meantime, many more states are working toward responsible cannabis law reform, especially since Colorado and Washington legalized the drug.
There are legal sales of marijuana occurring every day. It's been over $10 million so far, generating several million dollars in tax revenues. Keep in mind that's $10 million taken right out of the hands of criminals and gangs and instead put into the legitimate economy, as long as making sure we don't scapegoat and arrest people just for using a recreational drug.
More than a dozen states are expected to legalize cannabis in the near future, including Oklahoma, Alaska, and New Jersey.
New Jersey wants to do what Colorado and Washington Washington State have done now. You all have approved medicinal marijuana. That's in place, but you now believe it should be okay for people in your state to light up for recreational use. Why do you want this to be the case?
Well, I think anyone who is a student of history understands that if we don't review our history and understand that we're destined to repeat itself. We had alcohol, which was prohibited for many years, and all it did was create a criminal enterprise. That's exactly what we've done here in New Jersey and throughout the United States. Marijuana has been criminalized since the 20s and 30s. What we're trying to do here is save this country from what we've been doing over the last 80 years.
Even Missouri, which has some of the harshest cannabis laws in the United States, is progressing toward legalization with 2 separate initiatives. Furthermore, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama are close to legalizing medical cannabis, and Maryland, Texas, and Washington, D.C. are moving toward decriminalization. While the cannabis legalization movement has never had so much momentum, there is also a lot of pushback from prohibitionists and other reactionaries worried this could lead to federal legalization. For example, in February 2014, the official Twitter account of the Drug-Free America Foundation asked, "What happens if marijuana is legalized?" A perfectly reasonable question. However, attached was a graphic stating the number of cannabis users would double or triple if the plant was legalized, without any proof or citation of any kind. In all caps, the image also proclaims cannabis legalization would make the US a lazy, drugged-out zombie nation. When pressed for a source by readers on Twitter, the anti-drug organization simply said, "Do the research yourself, we have, and you know it's true." In response, Mason Taber, communications director for the Marijuana Policy Project, said, "When it comes to marijuana, the only ones stumbling around, grumbling incoherently, and slowly dying off are those fighting to keep it illegal. Using marijuana does not make you lazy, but making wild claims without even attempting to back them up does. If they truly believe in what they are saying about marijuana, it wouldn't surprise me if they also truly believe in real zombies." Another recent bout between advocates occurred during the NFL Super Bowl.
It's also the first to ever feature 2 teams from states where recreational pot is legal. And that's why some people are calling this matchup between the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos the Stoner Bowl.
The event prompted groups from both sides of the debate to post billboards in New York and New Jersey. Project Sam, an opponent of cannabis legalization, ran one ad that cast cannabis users as lazy and undetermined, a typical prohibitionist argument that ignores the countless number of intelligent, successful, and powerful cannabis users who are doctors, scientists, teachers, actors, musicians, CEOs, and even current and past presidents of the United States. Conversely, the Marijuana Policy Project, which played an important role in legalizing cannabis in Colorado, displayed 7 advertisements that relied on facts. For example, some of the billboards claimed pot is safer than both alcohol and football, which is true. There are about 88,000 alcohol-related deaths in the U.S. every year, according to the CDC. Also, in 2011, there were about 4,500 NFL injuries compared to about 2,600 in the year 2000. Of course, cannabis has never caused a death. Should the government be prohibiting alcohol and the NFL? Recently, President Obama also made a comparison between alcohol and cannabis.
You said that you thought smoking pot was a bad habit, but you didn't think it was any worse for a person than drinking. Now that contradicts the official Obama administration policy, both on the website of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and also the fact that marijuana is considered a Schedule I narcotic along with heroin and ecstasy.
I stand by my belief, based I think on the scientific evidence, that marijuana for casual users, individual users, is subject to abuse just like alcohol is, and should be treated as a public health problem and challenge. But as I said in the interview, my concern is when you end up having very heavy criminal penalties for individual users that have been applied unevenly and in some cases with a racial disparity. And I think that is a problem. The incarceration model that we've taken, particularly around marijuana, does not seem to have produced the kinds of results that we've set. But I do offer a cautionary note, and I said this in the interview. Those who think legalization is a panacea, I think they have to ask themselves some tough questions too. Because if we start having a situation where big corporations with a lot of resources and distribution and marketing arms are suddenly going out there peddling marijuana, then levels of abuse that may take place
Are going
to be higher.
If the president and other prohibitionists are afraid of children being influenced into cannabis use, why not ban its advertising like tobacco? Also, why are beer advertisements not worrisome to Obama and anti-drug lobbies?
We must trafficate with the male of your species. In exchange, they offer this.
Surely the high number of young people dying from alcohol and drunk driving should generate the same fervor to ban advertisements for alcohol. That is, if these people were being intellectually honest.
Cirrhosis of the liver, pretty serious thing. Violence against spouses and women. People don't smoke marijuana and beat up their wives and girlfriends. They get drunk. Sometimes they beat up their wives and girlfriends.
Recently, some cannabis prohibitionists were also upset that CVS pharmacies will no longer sell tobacco, using this change to take a swipe at cannabis legalization.
While politicians and voters are warming to marijuana, clearly, the crackdown on smoking tobacco continues. Just yesterday, CVS Pharmacy said it will stop selling all tobacco products, a move to emphasize its role as a healthy business, and that move takes effect in October. And the company was immediately praised for it, including a shout out from President Obama. All of this led to a pretty interesting critique from Senator Marco Rubio, who wrote, "Many of the same people applauding CVS for not selling tobacco are okay with making it easier to buy and smoke pot."
Of course, Rubio and other anti-cannabis advocates ignore the roughly 480,000 people who die from tobacco-related deaths in the U.S. each year. In spite of the cannabis naysayers, within years, a majority of U.S. states are expected to have legal or decriminalized cannabis laws. One recent study has projected a $10 billion legal cannabis industry nationwide by 2018. Inevitably, cannabis prohibition is coming to an end in America.
As much as 67% of people ages 18 to 34 favor legalization. Are we witnessing, Congressman Polis, is this the tipping point in the debate?
You know, I just invited the president and Harry Reid to Colorado to come visit some of our legal dispensaries. I think we are. Americans realize that prohibition has failed, just as it did for alcohol in the 1930s. It failed for marijuana. It's time to try a new policy. It doesn't make sense to imprison people, fill up our prisons, and create gangs and criminal enterprises just to try to reduce marijuana usage.